we're going to talk about the impacts that buildings have throughout their life. A building starts its life way before any one of us, whether that's architects or interior designers or clients or developers, even begin to conceive of its existence. The building's life really begins when materials are drawn out of the earth, when they're turned into products. If you joined us for the first days of our Metropolis Perspective Sustainability Symposium, you heard from Ed Masria about those embodied materials in buildings and why they matter so much. And if you heard Bill Walsh's keynote address yesterday, you heard about how the built environment is the largest consumer of plastics. So we consume fossil fuels in multiple ways in our industry. There is so much that we can address through the built environment, whether it is through the materials that go into our buildings, whether it is the impact that our buildings have on their occupants, and then of course, the impact that we have on ecosystems and on people when our buildings are decommissioned, deconstructed, demolished, renovated, reused, refurbished. There is just so much impact that we in the built environment can have on the lives of people and on the ecology of this planet. To help us talk through some of those factors, to help us understand the various impacts, and to talk about this whole life thinking when it comes to buildings and interiors, we have a fantastic group of panelists here with us today. We have with us Gail Nappel, who is the Global Design Resilience Leader for Gensler. Gail, such a pleasure to have you on with us today. We have Margaret Montgomery, who is a Principal and a Sustainable Design Leader at NBBJ. Margaret, such a pleasure. Mitch Quint, who's the President of Formica. Mitch, thank you so much for joining us. And Roxanne Spears, who's the Vice President Sustainability for Target. Roxanne, such a pleasure having you with us today. I'd love to start today's conversation with Gail. Gail, Gensler has made a commitment, as one of the largest firms in the world in our industry, to addressing the climate crisis through the Gensler Cities Climate Challenge. Tell us about how you're looking to reduce the negative impact of buildings across their life cycle, and how you're thinking about the impact of buildings in a holistic way.
Thank you, Avi, and welcome everyone. And then just really quickly to explain what that Gensler Cities Climate Challenge is, Diane Hoskins, our co-CEO, issued this challenge at the UN on September 23rd, that was World Environment Day, 2019, and made our commitment public. And specifically, our commitment is to eliminate all greenhouse gas emissions associated with our work by 2030. And her challenge was to the entire building industry to do the same. And so this is essential. We know that healthy people require a healthy planet. We all know we've got to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for the health of the world, and subsequently, of course, the health of all of us. And for buildings, this primarily means reducing operational carbon and embodied carbon, and including fairness and equity in the process. You can't do those things and ignore the impact that has on people as we do it. And so to your specific question, how are we doing this? Well, we actually shared some of our strategies in a publication we just issued, our annual Climate Action Through Design 2021, which some of you may seen. It's available on the web. And I'll go over a few of those things that we want to share, but focusing specifically on materials. For operational carbon footprint, obviously we want to pursue energy efficient strategies from the start of every project. And we have some 10 bullet points for ways to reduce the operational energy in a building. And when we get to materials, the key is to use low impact, low embodied carbon materials when you're building new. And in our own research, we found that over the course of a 60-year lifespan in a building, and don't get me started on whether 60 years is long enough for a building. I mean, my mind says they should be around for 2 or 3 or 500 years at a minimum. But in the course of a 60-year lifespan of a building, the initial embodied carbon footprint of the structure and facade are, of course, the largest. But if we make the assumption that in that building, the interiors are basically redone every 10 years, and we all know often it's more frequently than that. But if we assume that the interiors are redone every 10 years, the embodied carbon footprint of the materials that go into the interiors is greater than the embodied carbon footprint of that core and shell work. So this was an aha to us and to our partners in manufacturing, across the industry is, oh my goodness, interiors work has a profound ability to impact that life cycle of and carbon. So what do we do? How do we reduce this? Well, that definitely made our clients and our partners in manufacturing realize we need more transparency and we need more partnership to figure out how to reduce that carbon imprint, whether it's by recycling materials into the same materials again. And some of the people on this call are experts in that. So it's wonderful to know that people who are in an advanced stage of this are really pushing us and making products available for our clients. So that is just sort of holistically across materials. And then the other thing that has been really interesting is looking at adaptive reuse at all scales. We all know that the best thing we can do from an embodied carbon point of view is to not build something we don't need in the first place. The next thing that we can do is build only what we need and then make it as flexible and reusable as possible. And adaptive reuse strategies, I mean, we're employing them at all scales, prompted by our own goals and our clients, from products, repurposing, recycling, reusing. And again, manufacturers have been leading the way in some of these areas. With interiors, more and more designing for disassembly, focusing on those low carbon materials and choosing materials that are easy to reuse, literally reuse. For buildings, reposition and retrofit. Again, don't build something new if you don't need to. Assess the building's core and shell, see how we can reuse them, and look at the envelope. Sometimes we can even reuse envelopes, although that can sometimes be an energy issue. And then, of course, even it goes up to the scale of cities, right? Where we're being hosted by Metropolis, examine new uses that meet community needs before we destroy something. And of course, the High Line is everybody's favorite example of that, right? We didn't design it, but everybody loves it. Look for opportunities to partner with the communities themselves to say, how can we reuse this? How can we make this work where it is instead of trying to build something else new and abandon a community? And obviously that means connecting with the community. And then last but not least, measure our impact. We have been reporting our operational energy use through the 2030 commitment ever since it existed. And now we're developing a methodology to report our embodied carbon footprint across all of our projects, which means, giving ourselves a holistic embodied carbon budget and then designing to it, tracking it, and reporting it across our entire portfolio. So stay tuned. That's a big task, and we're looking forward to accomplishing it and sharing it.
Thank you so much, Gail. That's a great overview, of sort of the many different aspects of what it's going to take for us to turn the tide on the climate crisis, and to do so in an equitable and healthy way. Because you gave Metropolis that little plug, I can't resist. I just want to point out that in the May-June issue of Metropolis, we have a wonderful essay about the American Jobs Plan that's currently being hotly debated between the White House and Congress, talking about how we need to bring that adaptive reuse mentality there. Our author Billy Fleming, who's the director of the Ian McHarg Center at the University of Pennsylvania, calls it a fix-it-first mandate. And I think we need a fix-it-first mandate at every scale of our industry. So thank you so much, Gail, for bringing that up. I think that's absolutely vital. And part of what that does is that it also opens up opportunities, to create prosperity and health for communities around the world. So thank you so much for that overview, Gail. I'm gonna turn to Margaret. Margaret, you've been a long time advocate for a really holistic approach to sustainability, at NBBJ. What do you think is the next challenge for your firm or for architecture and design firms when it comes to sustainable practice? Where do you have your eyes set as the next frontier?
Well, I think you're going to find a theme here. Thank you, Gail, for getting that started. But first, actually, I have sort of three things that I wanted to mention. The first one is the continuous challenge to normalize high-performance sustainable design across an entire practice and an entire industry. It's a big challenge, and one of the tools that I have been really inspired both to be kind of part of the process for, but also to use in our own firm is the AI framework for design excellence. It's been it gives us that sort of holistic approach, and I love that it's been normalized as a set of design principles for the entire industry, not just for Sustainable Design Award projects, but it's for all of us, for all of our work. It's a tool that we use early in projects, especially so that we can, in an early charrette scenario, we can make sure that we sort of touch on all of those big important issues and the big important areas of design, and you almost inevitably can find at least one thing or one sort of key spark that will change your design and really get to some extraordinary design outcomes that you didn't expect. So we're really sort of pleased about that. The second thing is just to double down on carbon reduction in our projects, in our firm, all the way around. That is just such a critical thing. You know, we've also been part of the 2030 commitment since the beginning, and we've been reporting our portfolio's energy performance for over a decade. So we're committed to that, and we're committed to carbon neutrality in our own firm and to reducing our own footprint continuously. We are working to prepare our clients for that post-carbon future, and to do our very best to sort of dramatically reduce both embodied and operational carbon in our projects every year. And in fact, this year we were really excited to be able to report that we had over 5 million, about 5.4 million square feet of projects underway that have zero carbon intentions. So that starts to feel like a really hopeful sign from that. Oh, we're trying to get over that 50% savings mark to, wow, 100% carbon neutral, you know? But that challenge also includes embodied carbon. And we have been making this continuous effort at building efficiency, but as we always have to continue to do that, we also have a spotlight now on the initial impacts of what we build and how we build it and the materials we use. So Architecture 2030, as you probably know, has cited the statistic saying that between now and 2030, the impact of embodied carbon in new buildings will be over 70% of the impact of new buildings total. And that's because, you know, operational energy accrues over time, year on year. But day one, when you open the building, the embodied energy is there and it's too late to change it. You can't go back and take it out once it's there. So, you know, and we have projects, in fact, you know, we have hospitals that aren't even going to be opening until 2028 or 2029. And when you think about that, I mean, the embodied carbon is almost the whole impact. So it's really critical that we focus on that now. And the last thing I would like to note is that we're working hard, and I know our peers are, to wrestle with that role of climate justice. And what is our role in the built environment, and how do we contribute to that more just future in the built environment and in our society at large? We know that climate action is one of the ways that we can for sure make a difference. We know that climate change on a global scale clearly has had a disproportionate and will continue to have a disproportionate impact on women and on communities of color. And we know that everything that we do every day can affect that outcome. And as remote and small as our impact might seem, we do need to continuously sort of keep it front of mind and connect our daily actions to the global impact that we have on people that we will probably never meet. So it feels like we're at a moment of urgency, and, you know, time is short, and we have to act now, and we have to take it seriously now.
Thank you so much, Margaret. That was really moving. You know, you're absolutely right. Of course, thank you so much for talking about the first two big items, which is normalizing high performance design. And again, I will reiterate the AIA framework for design excellence, which really is an expression of the topic we're talking about today, which is a really holistic and whole life view perspective on the built environment. And the AIA framework for design excellence is a great example and a great starting point for anyone looking to apply a holistic perspective. The second thing, of course, embodied carbon, that the fact that you have large projects that will come online in 2024, 2028. I mean, we have to be thinking about 2030 is tomorrow for many of us in the industry. And so we have to act with urgency now. And if you connect that to, what Gail reminded us of, the cumulative impact of interior design, those buildings that are built in 2030, even if we reduce the embodied carbon impact of their structure, their envelope, the core, the day they're built, they will continue to accumulate embodied carbon every time they're renovated 2030 onwards. And so that's another coming challenge for us. And then of course, climate justice, we heard, for those of you who joined us yesterday, Bill Walsh make a really moving appeal, talking about the interconnections between carbon reduction, healthy materials, and climate justice. And that's, even though we don't have all the answers directionally, that's a great place for us to start. So thank you so much, Margaret, for reminding us of that as well. I'd love to bring Mitch in here. Mitch, I'd love to talk about Formica's sort of how you've set priorities at Formica over the past few years, because Formica's had a deep commitment to sustainability, and you're looking at both your own operations as well as the product you're putting out in the world and the customers you're serving through those products. Tell us about how you set priorities for the parts of your footprint and impact that you are addressing first.
Absolutely. Well, firstly, thank you, Avi. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and privilege to be here. Obviously, I start from a different place in the overall industry, but I share the same goals as the first two speakers. As you said, Formica manufactures a physical product, our decorative laminate product. And that does involve bringing in raw materials and transforming those materials with energy into a product that fits many design applications. As a result, we, like all product manufacturers, have a real need always to focus on managing our environmental impact. Historically, our focus has been on engineering our products and our manufacturing approach to maximize the product performance while minimizing our environmental impact. It's always been our goal. Minimizing or maximizing what you get with the smallest amount of overall resource input. And that is included a deep focus on energy management and material conversion yields. An example is we put in a big system to capture heat in our process, store it, reuse it multiple times so that it reduces the overall amount of original hydrocarbon input to create that heat in the first place. But admittedly, that focus historically has been within the four walls of our business. Starting last year, we joined up with Broadview, a Dutch-based company, and we began a much more detailed look at our overall sustainability approach. And we started by creating a full life cycle analysis. I'll talk about that in a sec, but quantifying every part of our environmental footprint. And we started with a cradle to gate approach, which was all the way back to from raw material extraction, all elements of transportation, and then our own manufacturing process. So we have detailed data on every step along the way. And we looked at three impacts. We looked at CO2 emissions, which is obviously the key driver of global warming, our energy consumption, as well as water usage at every step in the process. But kind of being in a direct response to your original question, Avi, for among those three environmental impacts, global warming or the CO2 emissions represents our absolute priority at this time. We have initiatives to address all three components, but just given the pressing needs of global warming, that is where the main thrust of our initiatives will be for the coming years. Based on this, we've set targets that are broadly in line with what the AIA is looking at. By 2025, we're going to reduce our direct carbon footprint by 25%. And longer term, we've set the goal and stated the goal that we're going to become net carbon neutral by 2030. And we're going to get there by two ways. First is we're going to significantly expand and invest in our internal efforts and our efforts with our raw materials to change the physical process of how we create our products, and as well as the overall construction of those products. We have a number of projects already on the books and additional items that are underway in investigation. We're looking at both reducing the amount of inputs and changing the inputs to either be renewable or much greener, either in the energy we source or the raw materials shifting to bio-based inputs and resins. Our second approach is for our residual carbon impact. Anything we can't physically reduce, we're going to go out and start offsetting that CO2, either through buying certified carbon offsets, but more so in directly investing in projects and just putting our money into projects that capture carbon. We're looking at a reforestation project right now. We're also, our parent company just bought a methane capture equipment technology company where they go to landfills and capture methane and then re-inject that back into the natural gas system, and methane being one of the worst culprits in global warming. So I think together, those reflect the financial resources we're willing to commit to reach these goals. Obviously, our first priority is to address our direct impact, but we have a willingness to the will to go out and address the rest of it. And lastly, I'll say is, to transparency is we're this week or next week, we're getting close. We're going to publish our first sustainability position paper where we're taking all of our LC analysis data and we're just going to publish it to the world, which is both great and scary. And as well as all of our initiatives and plans and targets for the coming years. And then our plan is to update that every year so we can say, here's what we said we were going to do. Here's what we did. Here's where we came up short. Here's where we overachieved. And based on what we learned over the last 12 months, this is what we're going to do going forward. And use that as a mechanism to both hold ourselves accountable and let the world hold us accountable as well. So it feels like the beginning of a very long and arduous journey, but it's both exciting and scary, like any good journey.
More power to you, Mitch, on that journey. It sounds incredible. And I think the transparency piece is so important, challenging though it may be for all of us. Just as there is a push for transparency with manufacturers, Gail spoke to the need for us to assess and report at every stage within architecture and design firms as well. There is a level of transparency that that we need to aspire to as architects and interior designers. There's also a level of transparency that clients or corporations who might be the end users of architecture and design services need to aspire to on their end as well. And that idea of measurement and transparency is really important. And we have already a question that relates to that, and I'm sure there'll be more. A quick reminder to everyone who's listening, please get your questions into the Q&A tab. There are some great comments and questions in there already. So please go ahead and put those in. We can start taking those in a few minutes. But this has been absolutely fantastic here. Roxanne, I'd like to bring you in here on, I think, another piece that connects back to some of Gail's opening comments, which is about the circular economy. Mitch spoke about ways to reduce carbon footprint through offsets and other means. But we know that, ultimately, the best way for us to ensure a sustainable and healthy future is to try and close the loop as much as possible, either within our industry or across industries. And I know Target has been working very hard on that. So can you talk a little bit about Target's sustainability efforts overall, as well as some of the progress you've been making towards circular strategies?
Sure. Thank you, Avi. Target is an international manufacturer of flooring materials, so we take our responsibility very seriously. We impact a lot of communities that we're in. We have a lot of employees, so everything we do not only needs to be safe for the people using the product, but our employees as well. So we see real value in that. So we're following the principles of circular economy, which is designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. So at Target, we look at closing the loop in circular economy in a more holistic fashion. We took the approach that we were going to reuse material we wanted to be healthy, to make sure we were designing out possible pollution. So we have 90% of our raw materials are third-party assessed according to the cradle-to-cradle principles. We using the cradle-to-cradle principles, we've been able to be phthalate-free since 2013, as well as free of heavy metals and halogenated flame retardants. And that's really been our design philosophy, is the cradle-to-cradle, while trying then to close the loop with circular economy. We also wanted our customers to have confidence in what we were doing, and so we provide documentation on all our products through third-party verification. And it's the transparency part that everybody's been mentioning. This was important in making sure our customers understood what we were doing and knew the information being shared was not just Target repeating and reporting the information, but really having the confidence that we were doing the right thing and having a third party verify that. And that was important to us, and we felt it was important to our customers as well. So these certifications are for every product we make. They cover material health. We do the EPDs and also then VOCs for our products, as again, that indoor air quality is so critical, where we're spending so much time, even more time lately, inside than we really want to. And then selecting good materials that can have a long life cycle, that are used for all of our product families, not just a select few. So that everyone who purchases a product, while you're purchasing $1 VCT or a $10 carpet product, we want everyone to have access to healthy materials. So it's across the board for us, that whatever we're going to do for all product families. And making sure that the products can be recycled is really kind of the cornerstone of our approach on that. We're also always looking at increasing the recycled and bio-based content of our products as well. We're focused on using less virgin raw materials, as we don't want to contribute to resource scarcity. And that's really part of making sure our natural system stays healthy. We have been doing a lot lately, but one project we've really been proud of, which is something we've been doing for 15 years now, is we're using PVB film for our Ethos carpet tile backing. PVB film is used in window glass and safety glass and usually ends up in a landfill. We've reused approximately 35,000 tons of film. So the circular economy not only contributes to designing out waste and designing out pollution, it also contributes to reducing that carbon footprint we've been talking about, both for specific products and companies. So recycling waste into valuable new materials emits a lot less carbon than using energy-intensive processing to extract and transform raw materials. It also places less of a burden on the world's natural resources, which are depleting daily. So the carbon footprint of using the recycled PVB is 25 times lower than that of virgin PVB. So the more we think about material that's installed in all of these buildings from top to bottom as actual new raw materials, the better off and the lower carbon footprint we will all have. And part of that also, again, is a transparency. So we've been part of the CDP report, which is Carbon Disclosure Project. For the last few years, we're at a level B, always trying to do better and want to do better. And then we also publish our CSR report every year, which we've been doing for a number of years, which is third-party verified. Again, for me, heading the strategy for sustainability, that third-party verification is really important, because I want people to feel like they can really be confident in the information. And then the other part of closing that loop is recycling. So we do a lot of recycling. It was kind of an easy target for us. We started recycling in Sweden at one of our facilities there in 1957. And that was really done because of the cost of raw materials. They needed to reuse them. They couldn't afford to buy new. And it's kind of interesting that now we're going back to that same process that we should have been thinking about all along. But the intent to recycle products is easy to say, but then there's the many processes that we need to have in place as well. So for Target, we're trying to make sure that we get recycling of installed waste as well as installation waste written into specifications as often as we can. Because if it's not in that initial spec and it goes out to bid, it's not going to happen. We also work with partners to take some of our products that we can't use back in our material and maybe they can use in theirs, giving that waste a second life. But no matter what, we have to look at materials brought back that are able to be recycled either with a partner, with ourselves. That has to be in the initial design and introduction of that product. Getting material back is getting a bit easier, but it's still a struggle. So we really have to have everyone in the process be aligned into the intent that as many products and as many materials on a job site will be recycled as possible. And I think that part of that process we still all struggle with. We need those materials back. They should be raw materials. And it's a matter of how do we loop everyone in and get everyone engaged in that process to make it really happen. So that's how we're looking at closing the loop. And we look at that for every product we make, whether it's stair treads or flooring material.
Thanks so much, Roxanne. I think that last comment that you made, aligning everyone, getting everyone on board, is another sort of common thread through all of our panelists' comments today, right? Margaret spoke about sort of the broad acceptance of sustainability, and that's really important because we really need to have some kind of critical mass here to make some of these systems and strategies viable, feasible, and economically sound for the future of the planet. So I'm going to return to that idea of alignment of stakeholders in just a few minutes. Before I do that, a quick thank you to all of you today for joining us for this discussion. A big thank you to our panelists, Gail, Roxanne, Margaret, and Mitch, for your insights so far. Thank you as well to our sponsors, Armstrong Ceilings and Walls, Carnegie, DuPont, Formica, MECO, and Target, for making today's discussion possible. We've been talking a lot about measurement and reporting, and we have a very important tool that we're lucky to have demonstrated at the end of today's discussion, which is Tally. One of the foremost tools for lifecycle assessment for architects and interior designers. And there's some exciting new developments with Tally. So I hope you'll stay after today's discussion to join us for a demonstration of Tally as well. Another small reminder is that Metropolis's Planet Positive Awards are still open for entries. We extended that deadline to June 30th. So if you are working on projects that broadly have the intent of having a positive impact on either people or the planet, whether it's through carbon reduction, energy performance, sustainability and wellness, resilience, social impact, health, please, I would encourage you strongly to enter the awards. We want to broadly recognize the good work that our industry is doing. Let's return to the discussion here. We stopped at the idea of alignment between stakeholders. And so before we get to our audience questions, of which we have a few, I'd love for each of you to comment a little bit about how you've worked with stakeholders outside of your organization, whether that's clients and customers, whether that's dealers and manufacturers, contractors, engineers or consultants, others in your supply chain. Can you think of maybe a couple of ways that you've been able to align with external stakeholders on what you do? Because we're never going to be able to address the whole life impact of buildings through our own work alone. It's too daunting and too challenging, and in some cases, completely impossible. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, and then we'll start taking audience questions here.
So I'll jump in just on a couple of examples that we like to share, and I think that they're fairly widely known. Well, with clients, we have been thrilled over the last year and a half, especially, to see the kind of climate action commitments that many, many firms, not just global companies, are making. And one of the things that I think Margaret will, attest to this too, that what we do is we immediately, when we have a potential new client or a client has made a new commitment, we familiarize ourselves with what their values are. And if we have a client who hasn't been particularly, explicit about what their concerns in climate are or their actions are in climate, we have that conversation with them. And often there will be points of connection that may not be so clearly, obviously, this is exactly about embodied carbon reduction, but you'll find that there are values, whether it's cost savings or engagement with the local community, that do reinforce that healthy planet direction. And so I think that it's given us an opportunity, especially when we have to be virtual, for another way to speak with our clients, to connect with them. And those conversations are often some of the most personal. And, you see people become animated and passionate about things because it's that wonderful nexus of what they do at work and what they care about deeply. So that's one thing on the client side. And the other thing I want to do here is just give a shout out to the structural engineering community, because we did a whole series of conversations over the last year with some of the major structural firms that we deal with to talk about standardizing reduced embodied carbon specifications for concrete and steel. And they are all over this. I feel almost like, and Margaret will tell me if she's had a different experience, I feel as if they've been waiting for us to jump in and do this. And it was like, yes, so that, this is a wonderful alignment. And we expect similar things, perhaps with the manufacturers that we work with, like Target. And for Mike, it was wonderful to see that engineers are so on top of this as well.
Absolutely. I hear the structural engineers have their own 2030 challenge now that they've just adopted officially across their profession, which is absolutely fantastic. The Carbon Leadership Forum, I think, worked with them on that. So any architects out there, if you're using structural engineering consultants, there's common ground there. Margaret or any of our other panelists, if you want to come in on this question about, other stakeholders and partners.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. And I'd back onto that structural engineer side. One of the things that we and some of the other large firms in our sort of collegial group are doing is we've created just a little bit of language to insert into RFPs for structural engineers to ask them about their climate positioning. And the SE 2050 is the actual technical name of that commitment that they've made. And it is really exciting because it is true that, we would have a large integrated sustainability charrette perhaps, and the structural engineers are kind of sitting there going, gosh, we really want to participate, but what can we do? And it's been, until we were really all kind of had our eyes dialed into embodied carbon, it's been a little bit challenging to give them sort of the full brief that they could have, and it's been terrific. And you're right. Gail, they're just like ready to go. They're so excited about it. And it's really terrific to see that. I would say also on the entire team side, when you look at the owner, the architect, the contractor, all of the subcontractors and subconsultants and all of the various people that are kind of really most actively involved in projects, I think one of the most important things is that when we work with that owner architect especially, but when we work with the owners early on to tease out what they care about the most, I think that's the absolute critical thing. Because if we align our priorities, there's a lot of different ways to get at these results that we're talking about. And if we align the priorities and make sure that they just really resonate with what our client wants to get out of the project, and then that we make those clear and accessible and make sure that everybody on the project knows, then everyone is a partner in achieving those outcomes. One of the projects I think back to a long time ago, which was a great example of this, was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation headquarters. That project, those aspirations and those goals were so clear that all the way down to the person sweeping up the job site at the end of the day could tell you why we were doing this project. And, you know, those are the kinds of things that make everyone an owner in a really successful outcome. So I think those, you know, that sort of broad distribution of the purpose and the vision and the meaning of the project are really valuable.
I would just add one that Gail mentioned in terms of working with customers or your clients. And though we're a manufacturer, a lot of times we talk to our sales team about, have you really understood what the customer is looking for, whether it's the end user or the design firm? And a lot of times they're like, well, we're not sure there. And I said, it's pretty evident that, you know, if you went to Gensler's website, you probably could figure out what is their target, and really getting to understand that that's the connection we need. But also as a manufacturer, getting our every department in our organization to understand that they contribute as well. And a lot of times people assume it's a sustainability department that's doing the work. And we are doing the work and we're setting the strategies, but we can't do it all. We're not the ones in the factory. And if you look at our operations team, you know, they're the ones who are evaluating our water use and our energy use, and then coming back to us and saying, hey, we figured out how to do a closed loop water system on this facility, and we can reduce our water usage by 40%. You know, so I think it's acknowledging that it takes a whole team to do it, and empowering everyone to believe in what they're doing and the impact they're making as well, I think is important, because it's all of us. It takes everyone to make all of this happen. And as we keep saying, it's very big what we're all trying to do. But to get there, I think everybody has to see the value in their contributions as well.
Yeah, and then the last thing I would add is we've added the process for us, which is going back to all the way through all of our suppliers and engaging them, which is a very different conversation than we've ever had with them. Starting with, you know, the question of, we need to see all of your environmental impact data and carbon data, and some of them are fully on top of it, and for some of them it's a beginning of a brand new project for them as well. And that's step one. And then step two is, you know, what can we collectively do about it? What's within their control? What is within our shared control? And then lastly, you know, how do we think of big things? Like, how do we change the fundamentals of what we're working on together, so that we have, you know, the short-term projects, which are energy and water and carbon, but the long-term projects, which are shifting the basis of the raw materials that we're sourcing. So that has been a huge expansion, and it isn't. There's not one department. It is all of our engineering teams and manufacturing teams, and then the purchasing folks as the point. But you know, that is kind of, as it fills into or flows into our business and then our factory, those are the things that we control, because the rest of our stakeholders, you know, you all, the design community, the fabricator community, you know, our goal, and we feel is our responsibility and obligation, is to bring to you the products that we bring in the most responsible way. And so we've really taken our kind of stakeholders backwards in terms of engagement and forward in terms of communication.
I love that. You know, I think it's what I gather from, you know, what all of you are saying is, it's really important to understand one's own place within the sort of value chain of the building industry, you know, at large. And I think that's such a critical insight, right? Is, you know, for people who have decision-making power over your professional practice, so whether it's your customers or clients, it's really about aligning with their goals and finding the story that resonates with them. And Margaret and Gail, you spoke about that really eloquently. And then for, you know, those who, you know, are in your own supply chain. So for architects and designers, it might be manufacturers or dealers. For, you know, for manufacturers, it might be their suppliers and their vendors. You know, it's really about setting goals and like getting everybody excited, you know, to get at a goal together. So thank you so much for that. You know, that's really important, understanding what different strategies you can use based on the incentives that might move different people within your context and within your project. We have a few questions here from the audience that I'd love to turn to. Laura Incher says, why is there not more of a push for carbon sequestering materials or a return to natural building practices? I'm an architect specializing in straw bale construction, and I still feel like I'm swimming upstream in my own field. You know, of course, there's been interest in mass timber, in rammed earth, in other construction techniques. So let's talk about, you know, carbon sequestration, as a strategy? Is it viable? Is it scalable? We spoke about it in the context of offsets. Just any reactions to this idea? Why is it still a challenge if it's not scalable? Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, that's a great question. I think we think it will become less of a challenge because the simple fact is that we need all hands on deck, all methodologies on deck, every opportunity on deck. And right now, mass timber, because it's further along and because it's such a well-known, incredibly ancient technology in many ways, it's perhaps not quite as challenging as straw bale or rammed earth, which are very well known at certain scales and in certain areas, but not so much globally. My sense is that all of these things are going to come into play more and more. I mean, the carbon sequestering products is really interesting towards the higher technology products. I think there's great interest in these as well, carbon sequestering concrete and so on. It's just, again, there's always that anxiety about being the first person to use them. And, the fact that if it's a product that's only been around 2 years, how can it have a 50-year warranty? There's, that, and we understand, with that risk aversion. But I do think that this is going to be a rolling and more rapidly escalating adoption of new technologies. So thank you for whoever it was for hanging in there. Please do, because I think you're going to see your day for the carbon sequestering technologies.
Absolutely. I think, straw bale may not make it to the scale of, downtown urban living. But there's a huge place. I mean, that's not the only kind of architecture that's out there either. So I think you're right, Gail. We need just that whole range of different opportunities and different types of technologies, whether they're ancient or whether they're new. I think there's a place for everything. The other thing is, I think we're in this early days of looking at embodied carbon in the same way when we were in the early days of looking at energy use, where there are so much low-hanging fruit. We used to just, have to look at the low-hanging fruit for energy conservation. And I think we're sort of at this place where we can do the same thing for embodied carbon, so that once we've wrung out all of the value that we can find there, I think you will find people more urgently looking at those new technologies and new products. But that means that they all have to be underway now, and they have to be sort of the advance guard has to be looking at them now and trying them out on a small scale and getting them ready for that, kind of uptake of the mass market. So I think it'll come. It's just there's a lot of low-hanging fruit still to get.
Yeah, and humbly, our for Michael Laminator, we've been looking at this and trying to understand it, because 70% of the mass of our product is wood fiber, and there is an embodied carbon element to that. And we've always viewed that as something that it's good. We try to recycle as much into that, but how that it plays into the overall equation, candidly, we have a lot of learning to do and to further understand that, and then be able to communicate it as part of our overall sustainability message. And we will certainly include that in future versions of our position paper and overall communication.
I have a question that might be more appropriate for Roxanne and you, Mitch. Kathleen Fritz says, Gail talked about upcycling and the importance of not always going through the recycling process, which is more carbon intensive. What are manufacturers doing to research more upcycling over recycling options? Are you thinking about upcycling? I know, Roxanne, you gave one example of the PVB film. So let's talk about sort of some of those things where we don't have to return material down to its components and then reuse it through a recycling process. Are you thinking about that at all?
We are, because we're also looking at how, say that you have a whole building that's being remodeled, what could be taken from there as, and say we have carpet tile in there and it's shredded, but it doesn't have to come all the way back to Georgia. Could it go to a local recycler who shreds it and shares it with somebody else as a new material, instead of taking it back, and it doesn't have to go into our product, but where else can it go? And then looking at, in terms of upcycling, it's hard without partners and the processes in place to really push that upcycling, which is what we would love to do. But we are looking at things like repairable flooring, so that there's a longer longevity to the product as well, that it's not going to wear away in 10 years. We know a lot of times it's more color that takes it away than anything. But then if the product maybe doesn't go down with adhesive, but goes down with tape and can be taken up, cleaned, and sold in a second market. And reusing it in that fashion. So there's a few things we're looking at that for flooring in particular, the application applies, and changing how we're installing the product may be one way that we can then be able to remove it, have it be reused somewhere else. And we've tested actually leasing the flooring products. Again, because we need to know where the product is, and we need to know how we can do something with it in that second stage of its life. So leasing the material has been another way that we've looked at as well.
Yeah, and similarly, I mean, this is one where we're in the early stages of our journey, because while we have two challenges. One, what technically can we do with the product in terms of upcycling? And we have some projects and ideas underway. But the return or the reclaiming of our product after it gets out to the market, because it's so wildly fragmented and it goes to so many different locations, and so that the logistic challenge, as we've looked at it, is unbelievably enormous, and then becomes its own carbon problem in its own right. And so we similarly look at durability and longevity as a key component of this. Right? The longer it lasts, at least at a minimum, it reduces the kind of overall impact year to year. But we are looking at it, but I don't have specific answers in the short term, more on the supply chain side, less on the technical side.
And as it's with logistics is having something locally where you can process or upcycle in something in New York State versus taking it back for Formica or for ourselves back to a facility, is how can we do things more on a local basis as well, creating, a new business, a new economy. And there's a couple of good organizations out there trying to do that. And I think we're going to start seeing more of that. It has to be, I think, more locally driven, rather than shipping things back halfway across the country just to shred it. There's got to be a better process that we can come up with.
And I'd like to jump in on that too, because this is something that I think for many architects, this is such a huge topic, about reclaiming and reusing or upcycling materials. And, we actually did an experiment on our own offices a few years ago, the last round of, remodels or new moves or new offices that we opened, to see how much of the furniture and casework and so on we could use from either a former site or from reclaimed. And it's pretty phenomenal if you put your mind to it. The logistics are the issue, as Mitch and Roxanne point out, but we've worked more and more with companies like A New Foundation, which is, they have their tagline is doing what's right with what's left. What a great name for a nonprofit, a tagline for a nonprofit. And there are more foundations like that or organizations like that to help people find, make match between the objects that are no longer needed. And we have our own initiative called G Salvage, and we're finding, again, primarily we are able to connect, clients that need new to them, and clients who are disposing of materials, whether it's carpet or casework or light fixtures, and that it works best at the local level. But this is, we're facing that point where Mitch and Roxanne will tell us all, they know more about this than I do, that materials are effectively running out. Supply chain speaking, not literally, but that, there's a finite amount of stuff in the world, right? And the need to actually address what we've got and reuse it with the minimum logistics challenges are what we're all having to look at. And it's as Mitch puts it very well, it's exciting, but it's a real challenge. And we know that it's going to take more people time, but maybe that's not a bad thing, to have people and time, and instead of literally having and more stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a comment here about, how great it is that, especially after Rachel's keynote address from Valerie Busher, who says it's great that there's a lot more people going for WELL certification. I was wondering if anybody wants to. Well, we've been talking a lot about material reuse and recycling, carbon reduction. Can we talk about sort of the health aspect of the impact of buildings as well, and how that's connecting to your work? If we can have a quick comment or two on that, that would be great, and then we'll go on to the other questions.
Margaret, do you want to go first? I've been talking a lot.
Sure, I will. Well, I mean, certainly the health of the occupants is always, health and the well-being of the occupants is always at the forefront of, how we think about design. And we spend a lot of thought and a lot of time with the research. And I personally have a real, kind of a soapbox about how important it is for us to connect with nature. And it's physically, emotionally, intellectually important for us on all sorts of levels. So we try to bring that research into our work and to, maximize sort of the biophilic elements that we include and make sure that we're picking the ones that are kind of connected with the research that makes them the most effective for that use. And, really focusing on the multi-sensory indoor environment. So the acoustical experience, the visual experience. We have a terrific lighting designer who is really passionate about circadian lighting and the incredible importance that our circadian system has on our health and well-being. And the two most important influences on that are how we eat and how we interact with light throughout the day. So obviously we have a little less impact on how people choose to eat, but we have a very big impact on that experience of, the right quality and quantity of light at the right times of day. So that's a huge element. And I'll just stop there for the moment.
One other thing, just very quickly on health that has been more and more on Gensler's radar screen is, as Margaret points out, the physical elements of a space that we do in our swim lane of designing the built environment are so critical, and we're also realizing that that emotional well-being and for us, one of my deepest passions is inclusive design, which is a very holistic view around design, not only for physical well-being but for emotional well-being and for the sense of belonging, and we're seeing a lot more clients really care about this deeply as well. So that's something where we've done our research and our own guides, and we're out to the experts all the time asking for more input and advice. And it's something that I think we'll continue to see more of, which has some physical elements that are manifested in the environment, but also includes corporate culture and HR policy. So things that everybody knows about, and yet the whole picture has to be there for people to feel truly well.
I would agree that the health of the buildings is so critical. And we manufacture commercial and residential products. And we work a lot with the Asthma and Allergy Foundation and find that there's a lot of studies that have been done with children who spend a lot of time in emergency rooms. They miss school. The family's already low income. The parents, one or two, miss work because of being able to have to go to the healthcare facility. And what ends up happening is it's not just a health issue, it's a social economic issue. And that health of those buildings are affecting the people as well as how they make money, how they're educated. If a kid is missing tons of school every year, how long is he going to stay in school? He's missed so much, and it's going to take so much to catch up. So I think it's critical not only in our workspaces, but in our homes as well. It all affects everything we do. And I think it's really critical to think of all those aspects of what we're putting in those spaces.
Yeah, and I don't have much more to add. Personally, we certainly work to create products that meet Green Guard and other standards that producing relatively inanimate product, we're giving it all to your systems, and you develop it into the environments that people work in. Here within our own business, we work very hard to provide a healthy environment, and we have all kind of programs that support people, whether or not they're on their own initiatives or smoking cessation, or we have all kind of exercise clubs and walking clubs and a walking path at Circles Our Plant. And we try to live that within our own business. And then as we put out our product, make sure that it meets all of the requirements of our community, or design community, and customers that are going to put it to use.
Thank you for that, Mitch. And actually, that really might be the next piece of how we think about health in the built environment. At Metropolis, we've become interested a little bit in this concept of embodied justice, much like embodied carbon. So thinking about sort of the manufacturing of those products and whether that is being done in a responsible way before they come to the job site. And so what you're saying about actually working in your own facilities is really important. I think it's like the next stage of how we're going to think about health and well-being in the built environment. And I'm going to make another quick plug. I'm sorry, today my day of plugs. I don't usually do these, but another quick plug, because Margaret brought up the idea of multisensory design. I just wanted to point out, that is a huge frontier, especially when we're thinking about inclusive design, when we're thinking about people with different sensory needs, different stimulation needs. If we're thinking about multi-generational spaces, we're thinking about spaces that support neurodiverse folks. We're actually hosting a panel discussion about called an Office for All Senses in a couple of weeks. More details on that on the Metropolis website. We're going to explore the topic just a little bit more. Let's come back. We have Dennis pulling us back into embodied carbon. Dennis O'Keefe says, there's still not a verified and accepted world standard on embodied carbon values. An accepted database is needed and needed quickly to avoid wrangling and potentially embarrassing delays and arguments. Comments from the panel, please. The same is needed for definitions at project levels for what net zero carbon means. Example, SBTs. Comments, please. I don't understand half of that question, but I'm sure. But I see lots of nodding heads, so please weigh in.
Sure, I'll jump in. So we have the same question, because as we're trying to create a global way for Gensler to target, design to, and then report embodied carbon tracking on all of our projects, we've done some analysis to say, well, what is the global standard out there? And went, there's 10 different definitions of this and 15 of that. So, and SBT is science-based targets. That's SBTI is the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and that is actually it connects also with the CDP or Carbon Data Project for reporting that so many of us organizations report to, either at the request of our clients or because it's becoming a more sort of common lingua franca of ways to sort of set where you are in that journey towards no negative impact on the planet. But the embodied carbon tracking, so what we've found is right now we've been watching a lot of our offices in Europe, because there are increasingly absolutely jurisdictional requirements for embodied carbon tracking and whole life carbon analysis. And I can't guarantee, and Roxanne and Mitch are nodding, so I'm sure they've seen this, and so has Margaret. I know you have an office in London, that if we find that there is a part of the world that's ahead of the game and saying we are going to recognize this standard, and if everybody can agree that that's the direction, that maybe that we may see a standard develop out of Europe that everybody agrees to use for that embodied carbon basis. So right now, I would say that, because of client requirements, our European offices are ahead of the game in understanding this and seeing some consistency, and we have seen some differences in the ways that we report whole carbon for those projects versus, say, the way it's done for other for certification systems that are not European based. So we know there's a difference. We understand and agree there's an issue, but we think a lot of people are working on it, and it will be interesting to see how a consensus is formed.
Yeah, I agree. I'd say that, the first step in this is understanding the transparency, and I know that the open EPD format that's being developed right now is something that will probably help that, so that, a little bit of a common reporting format. It is a really interesting challenge, but again, we're a little bit in the Wild West, and it's going to happen fast, but it hasn't happened quite this fast yet. And I think for us, at least for us in the design side, the most important thing right now, even if we don't have the absolute answer, we have the relative answers. we know how to make better decisions, and we can do, rough order of magnitude decisions. We know which aspects of the project have the biggest footprint. We know how to reduce those footprints. And even if we don't have it down to, decimal points of impact, we do know how to do better work. So I think that is the most important thing, that while we're waiting for the detail to catch up, we just don't wait for it. We just need to keep going ahead and, keep doing all of those things that that we know are going to get us the better outcomes, even if we don't know exactly what the number of that outcome is.
I couldn't agree more. Dennis, that's a question right to my own heart, because as an engineer, I want to just give me the rules and the measurement and I will go do that. It doesn't quite exist, but for us, our starting point is we know we can do things to get better. And what we're going to start doing is start moving forward, start doing the right things in as big as we can, as fast as we can. And I agree, the standards and the measurements will catch up. And I think we have a lot of room just to get better with the things that are within our own control, and that's the race we're going to start running, or are running.
I have a
Mitch, I synthesize.
Sorry, I just
I was going to
comment on Gail's comment about Europe. Where Target is headquarters in Paris, and we see a lot of activity around being taxed on your carbon footprint or being taxed. So they may drive some changes a lot faster because it's a financial connection there. And we're starting to see some of that.
Yeah. There's a lot of policy pressure on the Biden administration to start considering carbon tax, even though, and funnily enough, a lot of economic conservatives are in favor. So we'll see where that goes in the US. I have a quick question for Roxanne here from Katie from Malum. Katie, thanks for joining us today, by the way. Roxanne, when writing recycling of installation waste, etc., into specifications, is this writing it specifically that it is recycled back to you, the manufacturer, or just that it is recycled generally? Thinking about lead projects in particular, where landfill diversion credits are achieved and products may be recycled locally but not get back to you. This is in connection to your point about demolition specs.
Yes.
So do you want a quick comment on that?
Sure. And we have a specification that goes both ways, and we really have left it up to the design firm as to which one they want to use. For some products, it's much easier to recycle them locally, and we understand that. And if that's what works and makes it happen, then that's so much for the better. A lot of times it depends on if they're going for lead or what specific program they're going to. So we try to work with them, whether we can take back the material to ourselves or locally, whatever is going to work. But there are specifications for both, just to make it a little bit easier in the processing. In certain states, California has a totally different standard. So.
We have a question from Ryan Bodell here that I'd like to bring up. He says, how can we get all these factors considered in an integrated way as part of the day-to-day building process? In a research project here in the UK, we've looked at how value engineering could be translated into sustainable value engineering, where value could include embodied carbon, circular economy, and social or natural co-benefits alongside financial value. Would the panelists see that as a helpful and practical thing to implement? We're talking about value engineering, which is, of course, connected to, product specification and construction administration. But I don't know if there's a way to even think about this for other design stages. How can we start to redefine some of our building industry stages or terms to better reflect the kind of new goals we have, much in the spirit of the AIA framework for excellence? Okay. Sorry, I didn't want to make that question even bigger than it is, but I'm sorry I did that. If you can react to whatever part of it you'd like to.
Well, so I would like to jump in and just say, we do have some clients like San Francisco International Airport, for example, that look at their overall projects in a very holistic way, including, social cost and environmental cost, not just embodied carbon or just operational energy or just first cost. So it absolutely can be done. There are actually a couple of software systems that one can use, in various degrees of development or, have existed for a few years. And I think that that's it gets back to the whole bigger question about what do we value. Are we looking at the triple or quadruple bottom line, not just a first cost, a first financial cost, capital cost. And it feels that the world is moving forward on that, but I think it's still, we've been entrenched in a more in a certain kind of economic view for such a long time that I think it's just taking us a while to change that. We're optimistic that it's changing. We see so many clients caring about that, but obviously we all have to remember that, and everyone has to remember, and we do, that you can't necessarily buy health with a dollar. You have to look at the overall process, and you can't buy more days on earth, just because you have more money. So I think that's, we all kind of get that viscerally, but translating that into something that is meaningful enough and is measurable enough, to Mitch's point, that people feel confident in it, is a little more, it's a societal shift.
Sorry, go ahead, Margaret.
I was going to say the way we often address that, getting the various different things that you really want to measure in order to make decisions. Yes, first cost is one of them, but we often, will develop a matrix of values with, in particular products or projects. What's important about this aspect of the project? What aligns with the values that we're trying to achieve here? And then it helps you to sort of weigh in more than that single dollar value when you're making decisions. And, embodied carbon is an easy one to factor in there, but there are also other impacts. I mean, the obvious ones that we always have is it might be cheaper, but is it harder to get? Is it harder to maintain? How long does it last? Some of those questions, what's its embodied carbon? What's its health impact? What is, all those other different questions that you want to ask. If you can sort of codify them in a thing that people can see, rather than just a discussion, you can always refer back to it. And it helps sometimes when people are talking about VE, you can go, wait a minute, we talked about this earlier on, and is it still valid?
Yeah, absolutely.
Given where we sit in the overall process, we aren't as influential on the building side, but from our own business, we've structured the way we make decisions. There are financial considerations, but there's just called license to operate, or our right to exist as a business, and the priorities there sit above all others. And it starts with our own employee safety, but within that same bucket is our sustainability commitment that we're making broadly to our local communities as well as to our entire customer base. And so, I think it's that, and that, to the earlier comment, that has come to us in part from our Dutch parents, and so we feel that European influence, but it has been great for our business. And I think as that mindset expands out and goes to more people who are on the procurement side of buildings and spaces, that will come to I assume the building community from that direction as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A quick thank you again to our sponsors, of course, to Target and Formica, who are represented on the panel today, but also to Armstrong Ceilings and Walls, Carnegie, DuPont, Dell Technologies, and MECO for supporting and making today's discussion possible. A last question to all our panelists. Ariana Gomez says, thank you all for the wonderful information. As a recent graduate entering the workforce, what advice would you give to help entry-level designers push the envelope within a firm that may not be, quote unquote, eco-conscious yet? Any advice for Ariana and her cohort?
I'll jump in on that too. I think we find that a similar approach with clients who may not really have thought about this yet is often useful, because inside a firm, inside a project team, inside of any venue, even outside of your work life, if you can find that point of common ground with the people that you are working with, you need to do something with, you need to persuade, then when you find that common ground, and Margaret put it really well earlier, you find that thing that you move forward on. And it may take a little bit more work to say, okay, I see that they really, really care about plants. well, how can I work that into, biophilic design, or using plants that are using bio-based materials that are not depleting the forest? So it may be a little bit more of a research project initially, but one of the wonderful things about the process is that you do find those points of common ground with someone, and that just opens up a relationship over time. Definitely it's work, Ariana, but it's worth it. And thank you so much for asking, and thank you for persisting.
I'd say for
I will add. Oh,
go ahead,
please
Mark.
go.
Just to say, even outside of the design firm, in any organization, if you have a passion for sustainability, bringing that passion to an organization is very important for all of us, because it continues the conversation. It pushes everyone to do a little bit better. And, maybe you just pick one topic for manufacturers, it could be indoor air quality of the product, and slowly talk about the value of that and why you're finding that important. But, educating and sharing the knowledge. They may just not have heard a lot of the information, but that passion drives change for all of us. And it's important whether it's a design firm or any other type of company.
I love that, Roxanne. I think finding your passion is really at the core of how to, successfully change hearts and minds. I have also noticed, well, I guess it depends on your approach. Everyone's got a little bit of a different personality and a different way of going about things. I have found over time that people love to feel good about what they're doing. So the more you can give people positive reinforcement for doing good things, the more likely they are to do more of them. And I've also found that when people start saying things back to you as if it was their idea, that's when you're successful.
Yeah, my last comment would be, as someone who's somehow is on the latter stages of their career, I've come to greatly appreciate the input from our newer team members and hear their voices and value that input, because on some level, those of us deep into our careers, we've been operating in a certain way within a certain environmental footprint of our career that we need to make good on. And your voices matter, because it is really going to be your business and your world well after we're out of the workforce. And so it's not easy to speak up and put your voice out there sometimes, but it is incredibly important and incredibly valuable. And I would just, whoever used the word persist, I think that's the great word for that.
Thank you so much. What a lovely inspirational note to end today's discussion on. Thank you so much, Margaret, Gail, Roxanne, and Mitch, for such a lively and really frank discussion today. Thank you for sharing your insights, for being really pragmatic and realistic about where you stand, where you yourselves feel like you have progress needs to be made, and where you think the industry needs to go. This has been such a lovely discussion. Thank you so much for this.